I'm gonna take this in 3 bites. One, an overview, how we see it, the economic impact, and some unintended consequences. Okay. The overview, it's a 10% tax, as you know, our tariff, I should say, on, but we actually see it as a tax. We're fully supportive of a robust U.S. aluminum industry. If that's the goal of the administration, is to have a robust aluminum industry, we would say that we have no problem with that. The problem becomes it doesn't exist right now in anywhere near the capacity it requires to sustain our business, as well as other industries that utilize aluminum in the United States.
I think if you go back, as we mentioned, that all of the can sheet comes actually from the United States, but the way we feel the tariff, if you can go into that a little bit.
That's a great point. So we get our rolled sheet stock from mills in the United States, but they get their aluminum ingot from outside of the United States, and that's where the tariff is applied. Okay,
and the majority of that comes from Canada.
The majority of that comes from Canada. I know there was a lot of concern over other countries. The vast majority of aluminum we use in all of our plants is coming from Canada, but that now is also subject to a 10% tariff. Okay. The problem becomes we don't have anywhere to go. There's not an alternative to steer us to support a domestic aluminum industry. So really, the tariff becomes just a tax. Okay. Is what's happening, is the way we see this. So economic impacts, the direct impact of that 10% costs us in excess of $347 million.
And that's the beer industry as well.
Yeah. So that's 2.2 million jobs in the U.S. beer industry, okay, in the United States. 97% of the aluminum impact is downstream. So the aluminum comes in, and then there are a whole lot of industries that are impacted by it. It's 97%. 41% of beer pricing right now is already taxed. So this is just going to be on top of that. So we're not saying necessarily that this is going to result in a price increase. We don't know. So we don't want to pass that on. Part of our advantage is we have verticalized facilities like this one that help us manage the cost structure. But regardless, it's an impact on our business and the profitability.
It's an additional expense that you weren't counting on.
You got it. According to John Dunham and Associates, $2.5 billion loss in economic activity and $275 million in lost tax revenue. Okay. Then we move to the unintended consequences. This pushes domestic beer consumers to wine or spirits or imports. The imports coming into the United States are not subject, the cans that they use are not subject to this tariff, okay, because they were utilized or filled out of the country. Okay. It also discourages the use of what we think is the most, beyond what we think, what is proven to be the most efficient recycled container for packaging out there, which is the aluminum can. It's infinitely recyclable. A can can become a can, over and over and over. It doesn't require added streams of new aluminum.
A recycled can takes 1/6 of the energy of a new can.
Okay.
So new aluminum is way more expensive to make into a can than recycled is.
Right. The other concern is the potential of retaliation, right?
Sure.
We, at this plant alone, we export a large percentage of our lids out. We're sending 600 million lids to Canada. So what if Canada decides that they want to retaliate? What if our lids that are going out into Central America? So it could potentially undermine our ability to do business outside of the United States. Okay. And then the last component is the Midwest Premium, which I think that you're aware of. The Midwest Premium is an index for bringing metal off the London Metal Exchange, where we trade metal, into the United States. The whole idea was originally conceptualized for logistics costs, bringing it in and then distributing it out to end users. What's happened since the tariff has been announced is the Midwest Premium has doubled. And it hasn't retreated since the announcement of the tariff. So that part of our concern is that we would look for some semblance of oversight into that to make sure that it's reasonable and that it's not an unintended consequence of the tariff to disadvantage U.S. industry.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we definitely are supportive of the administration's goals on supporting U.S. manufacturing. It's a huge U.S. manufacturer, Anheuser Busch has 18,000 employees across the country and more than 100 facilities, including our Metal Container Corporation facilities. And we just want to, remain competitive as U.S. manufacturer and a downstream user of aluminum.
Questions for us?
It's a great overview. I guess one question would be, although the relationship with Canada and many of our traditional allies is a little different than when we're talking tariffs, but how much of the aluminum market used to be in the U.S. and then how much of it was done with Canadian aluminum and then got us to the point where it was cheaper to bring outside aluminum in than it was to domestically produce?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
So I don't have the specific number on how many smelters used to be in the United States, but I could get that to you. But they have been closing largely due to the lack of investment, I would say, in the smelters here in the U.S. They're just a lot older than facilities elsewhere. But the U.S. has kind of matured into a different market where we export more finished goods, like the United States exports finished cans or scrap metal. And so it's kind of like the aluminum market is, it's still a big industry in the U.S. It's just shifted away from the primary to more manufactured goods. And so we kind of face a problem here in the U.S. now where the existing smelters are just a lot older, and it's really hard to restart a smelter, and it takes a long time. There's just not a lot of... Yeah,
because when we look at the steel industry, you had about 1/3 of the steel industry that was kind of usurped by foreign markets, and so the potential is there, but it's a similar story where you have, okay, you got to modernize the domestic capacity if you're going to, if you're going to grow domestic raw material production, and that's why I asked the question. So
it's easy to see a template on steel, right? I mean, there was a time when the U.S. had a really robust steel industry, right? In aluminum, we never had that history of market dominance. So the very least, I think what we would argue for is some transition plan as we try to build that U.S. aluminum industry that doesn't disadvantage us. So.
Yeah, it's difficult to go from a very small smelting industry in the U.S. to kind of squeezing the downstream to try to amp it up really fast, because that's just not feasible to amp up that fast.
Right, and then the fact that in this case, our main supplier being Canada, longtime ally, great trading policies, a lot of that. So, it provides a unique dynamic that may not be shared with other metal industries or something like that. Interesting.
Other questions? Yeah.
So these have not harmed the plant to date? You haven't slowed production or laid anyone off?
No.
Could that happen in the future?
It's too early for us to tell. Go ahead, Caitlin, if you want to.
Yeah, I think as a whole, it affects the ability for future investment and for future planning for things like expansion or expanding the workforce or expanding plants and doing things like the great investments that Oklahoma City has done, because it is a feature that makes plants like this less competitive as compared to kind of global plants. And we as a global company, we compete for those CapEx dollars with our other zones, and so it's difficult for us to say, okay, well, now's a great time to invest because it's an additional tax on the materials.
It's too early to tell what's going to happen to the market. Back to what I said before, will it push people out of cans or aluminum cans or to another beverage container?
Certainly has that potential.
Has the potential to do that.
And then I guess, as we've examined steel, part of the dynamic we're seeing is in a booming economy. You're seeing growth in construction. You're seeing more orders being placed. As the GDP has grown, the demand has grown with that. So in some ways, it's too early to tell what the impact is. It may be fine, and it may just ride out with the growth of the economy and the modernization of steel capacity. Do you see an impact on economic growth of the country? I mean, what you're making is largely consumer beverages. If people have a little extra money in their pocket, maybe they'll buy another 6-pack. or maybe they will get together more socially, and that generates increased sales. Are you seeing any economic dynamics like that, or is it too early to tell?
I think that when we look at, we've had a lot of the rhetoric around, it's a penny per can, so maybe it's, when it comes down to the consumer, maybe it's just a penny, but I think when it adds up, for us, it's not just a penny. I mean,
right.
Anheuser Busch makes 500 cans a second, right? So
right.
it's that plus, the tax on soup or on soda or all the other things kind of in the grocery store, and I think we're going to have the potential to see the cost of living rise, and it might actually be too early to tell that until you really get down the line. I think there's been a lot of talk around, once all of these retaliatory tariffs go into effect, or once these policies kind of mature a little bit more, whether there's going to be some sort of wave of effect. We hope not, but it certainly has the potential.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking the questions, visiting the different companies, looking at the impact. Is it something that the market absorbs, or is it something that will change the market?
Yeah.
So,
just building on that penny per can analogy that was thrown out there, I think that's a little bit of an unfair look, because I'm sure that there's small beverage producers out there that a penny per can is the difference between success and failure.
Sure.
Across their entire
yeah, well,
year.
It may be a 1% or a 0.5%, but that may be vital to their expansion or their
Exactly.
benefits to employees, a number of things. Yeah.
Right. When we talk about a long-term solution, we want to make sure, businesses, and particularly small businesses too, are there for the long term. That they can
Now, one of the flip arguments on this is that if no actions were taken, and the United States has a labor market where we produce manufactured goods, but now you have others that are growing their workforce into more capacity, and then because of our labor costs versus theirs, that they will begin to usurp the manufactured good markets, and that where there's a niche for the U.S. now, raw materials to manufactured goods, it may be to we're making nothing at all, we're buying them from somebody else. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, for this plant in particular, I will tell you, we're pretty competitive. We're not afraid of being competitive on a world market. We shipped lids 2 years ago to Mexico, millions and millions of lids, and we're very competitive, and the in-country supplier lost the business to us.
There you go.
We supply lids to Canada right now. We're not afraid of competition,
Yeah.
I guess is what my response will be.
No, that's good. Yeah.
The efficiency of our workforce here is
Right.
higher than the competitor in another country.
And I think this is one of the points that often gets lost in the discussion, is that 20 years ago, a lot of people were afraid of computerized machining, robotics improvements, because they saw that as taking labor away. But the reality is it has totally reinvented U.S. manufacturing, so that a lot of that production capacity came back to us and made us competitive, because we were able to do things so much more and to the high standards that the United States is known for.
So I'm going to go back to what Lewis was talking about around our team members and being innovators. They understand this is a business.
Right.
Our guys are taken care of. They're well compensated. That's why we have very little turnover.
Yeah,
okay?
obviously.
But they know that they need to still be competitive. So what they do is they say, well, we're going to use our brain power. We're going to build a better mousetrap. We're going to do a better design. Even if we're competing against a facility that has much lower labor rates out of the country, we're going to do it smarter so that we can retain our standard of living and be competitive.
And this is one of the points that I think is worth noting, is that there are many countries that can duplicate, but there are only so many leaders in the world that actually innovate. And the United States has always had a tradition of innovation, because from the time we all grow up, we enjoy the fruit of our labor. We own the rights to our property. We have the ability to succeed and have legal guarantees to our inventions. And this will always create this culture of innovation where others, if you're good, the state may come and take it over. And we don't have that. And so it's kind of this back and forth dynamic when you look at it economically. And now we're in one of these interesting periods where we see manufacturing coming back, but now we're looking at these trade things on raw materials and who gets to compete for them and who gets to do them and who can make better on it. And it's just an interesting time economically in the history of our nation to watch what's happening.
Yeah, that automation demands a skilled workforce.
Absolutely.
And that's where we see is, we compensate well, we have retention, on our employees, but they, we have a high expectation for skills. It's not just rudimentary manual labor. So that's the downstream effect of that automation and innovation changes who you need in your facility.
And our guys understand their role in being competitive.
Well, and the ability to succeed. That if you do work hard, you started out at the shop level.
Yep.
You now have the job that he had as he moved up. You look at things like that. Whereas some, they may work 40 years pulling the same lever, in a state-owned factory or doing something like that. Yeah, they can make it a little cheaper, but they duplicate it. They don't necessarily innovate and continue to expand and grow where they could be left behind. So, this is one of the big unknown questions that we have when we look at U.S. industry and we look at our technological advancements, our competitiveness in the world. I don't think you can just put it on a plane of labor cost.
Right.
The United States continues to be resilient in adapting to change and cycles. And again, we're just in an interesting time. But it is neat to see when you've got people hanging plaques on the wall for 40 years at a company or 30 years at a company. I mean, that's loyalty. They don't hang around because they want that plaque. They hang around because it's a good job and it gives them a quality of life. So that speaks well.